Okay, this video is a book review, and the book review is written by this man here, Stephen Meyer. The name of the book is The Return of the God Hypothesis. He's a very smart man. He's a PhD engineer and biologist. And the point of the book is that the best explanation for the creation of the universe and life on Earth and the complexity of life is God. And I say that based on science, not on religion, not on emotion, not on feeling, based on science, okay? When you actually really study, and by the way, I majored in evolutionary biology at Stanford University, was an A-plus student, and I've read extensively on the subject since that time. This is just one of the more recent books on the subject. And it kind of does come down to this argument in a sense that if you saw your name written on the beach, you would know that an intelligent, literate person had written it. And if it takes an intelligent, literate person to write your name, whatever it is, 5 or 10 letters, it would take an even smarter person to be able to write the DNA code, which is 3.3 billion base pairs of very complex chemistry, okay? And then what you get into from there is all of the fine-tuning arguments. And the fine-tuning arguments are that the precision of design is just so complex. It takes, something beyond what human genius can comprehend type of brain to do it. Okay, this, by the way, here, sorry about getting this thing in the right spot here. Gotta grab myself. If I can select myself, it's not that easy to do. So anyways, the Big Bang Theory shows that the universe is expanding. And an expanding universe implies that it had a beginning, because if you take you can tell it's expanding because you can look at a Doppler shift, that the sound waves keep changing in a pattern consistent with moving away from a central point in all directions. But this also means that the universe had a beginning. If it had a beginning, then that pulls you into the unmoved mover argument. Something had to initiate that beginning, and it indicates that God did it. Then you're stuck with the deism versus theism argument. Deism is a God created the universe and then walked away and didn't care about it. Theism is the God cares about the universe, and that is most consistent with what happened, because it was too hot when it was first created. God had to come back and create life, okay? And you can't explain life from biologic chemistry, because it's geologic chemistry when life is first initiated. It's way too complicated. James Tour is the best expert on that. Nick Cage is sort of the guy who talks about possible theories for an atheistic viewpoint, and he's a bright guy, but he's a long way off, as Tour would indicate. Okay, so here's actually the book cover, Return of the God Hypothesis. I listened to the audio version of it, and I bought the paperback, and I liked it, but it gets into lots and lots of technical detail. He's an engineer. He goes into all kinds of technical details about astronomy, and he's pretty good at biology as well. Some of the big arguments, like I said, an expanding universe takes you to the unmoved mover, what began the movement of the universe. The fine-tuning arguments are just incredible for astronomy, and when astronomers study it in detail, like Fred Hoyle was a famous astronomer, they become believers in God because it's just too miraculous, the complexity of it. Then there's the fine-tuning arguments in molecular biology. Michael Behe's sort of the famous one on this topic, that you have an irreducible complexity for developing a flagellar motor, the blood clotting system, the immune system, the eye, the brain, etc., etc. One of the things mentioned in the book is the issue of the development of the modern scientific method. And people say, what about the ancient Greeks? They had some really bright people like Aristotle, and Aristotle was great at logic. And he did some observation. Alexander the Great would send him back all these biologic specimens of the different areas that he had traveled to. But they really weren't that great overall at direct observation like natural history, and they weren't that great at doing experiments. So the Greeks did not have the modern scientific method the way we think of it today. And it didn't come out of other cultures. It came out of Europe and the Catholic Church. And the reason for that is a Bible-based worldview that says, God created man in his image, therefore we can be creators, and God is rational God, and therefore it's a rational universe, and we're like God's image, so we can understand it. We just need to study it. That mentality led to the modern scientific method arising out of Europe and the Catholic Church. He then gets into a little bit of the philosophic stuff. And there's other people who've talked about this, like Nietzsche, that the so-called scientific materialistic view of the world is a very truncated view of reality. Nietzsche had said one time, how could you use a mathematical study of music? What are you going to do, count the number of notes? You can't create anything meaningful from doing that. Okay, scientists And Stephen Meyer says, scientists used to think of life just consisting of matter and energy, but there's a third very important variable, information. Where does the information come from to write a 3.3 billion base pair code in the DNA? It's just incredible. Geologists have not found transitional forms leading to the Cambrian. So the Precambrian rock, and by the way, this guy is also a geologist. Okay, like I said, he's a really smart guy, Stephen Meyer. You don't see the transitional forms. Darwinian theory would predict a whole bunch of gradually changing transitional forms leading up to a new, totally different speciation and families of species, but they're just not there in the rock. Like Louis Agassiz, the famous natural historian geologist, he said, the record of the rock refutes Darwinism. And what is a Darwinian mutation? It's like taking a paperclip and scratching an audio CD. You don't create favorable change like that. You can't go from Mozart to Beethoven by scratching an audio CD with a paperclip, or Brahms or Handel, and the change in the animal world is much greater than that. Okay, Darwinism can help explain sort of some small-scale variation within a species. You can create different types of dog by selective breeding, but you can't create a tiger by selective breeding of dogs. It's just never going to happen. So it can explain sort of microevolution within a species, maybe even theoretically, potentially moving up one level in the evolutionary scale. Kings play chess on fine-grained sand, the mnemonic for kingdom, phylum, class, order. Okay, but it cannot explain large-scale variation. So it can explain microevolution within a species, but it can't explain macroevolution, creation of a whole totally different species. So Darwinism, it's also been said, can account for survival of the fittest. One variation might survive better, but it can't explain arrival of the fittest, arrival of complexity, origin of complexity in animal design, okay? There's been other guys too, like Douglas Axe. He's a protein biochemist, and he showed how incredibly difficult it is to create a functional protein. And so the idea that this could happen randomly is just no way. It's like, here's what Stephen Meyer said. The probability of creating a functional protein by chance is 1 to the trillion times smaller than that of finding some random particle within the entire universe. It's nonsense. It's so unlikely that it's absurd. And you also get into this issue of what are sort of like two competing major views of nature. And one is sort of the Bible-based view, the Trinity in heaven, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That view in the Holy Family, Virgin Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. Okay, that's one sort of aesthetic, philosophic, religious view that celebrates life and meaning, okay? But there's another view that is sort of really the accepted way of thinking in the American university, the American graduate school today, and I call that the Trinity of Atheism. And the Trinity of Atheism is Darwin to say, as it's been described in the book, to say where we come from. But actually Darwinism doesn't. It can't explain this. And everybody who studies Darwinism knows this. This is not like some mystery. It's kept hidden from the students that only take one class in biology, okay, that don't really know much. And then Marx tells us where we're going. But Marxism is failed. Marxism is a disaster. Marxism is a joke. Marxism is centralization scheme to trick the proles into making themselves into slaves. It's nonsense. Okay, then Freud is the evil third part of the Trinity to tell us about human nature. But when you look closely at Freud, you see almost every single thing he said on a major scale. It was just nonsense, okay? Like I said, the idea that every boy wants to have sex with his mother. That's insane, okay? You don't even know what sex is when you're young, okay? It's just crazy. And we're not going to get all into Freud, but Freud was perhaps, a pioneer in some ways, but he was a crazy jerk. The more you look at him, the more ridiculous psychoanalysis is, okay? I'm not even going to go into it. I'm not even going to give it more credit than it deserves. It's a joke, okay? Now, here's a good quote about Marxism by John Dos Passos. He said, Marxism not only fails to produce human freedom, but it fails to produce food. Yes, it's a way to centralize everything, take away all incentive, and lead to starvation of the population, which is then forced into slavery. It's all just stupidity. Okay, here's Fred Hoyle, the astronomer, an atheist who became a believer in God after he started studying what's going on in the universe. He said the chance that higher life forms might have emerged by an evolutionary process is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 plane. It's ridiculous. It's statistically absurd. I have always thought it curious that while most scientists claim to eschew religion, it actually dominates their thoughts more than it does the clergy. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. Fred Hoyle, astronomer. Yeah, the more you look at it, the more you'll come to this conclusion. And that's why other people like, Isaac Newton, the smartest person who ever lived, he said, of course, the distance of the sun to the earth, the position of the moon, all this stuff didn't happen by chance. Well, anyways, if you want to hear all the detailed arguments, you can listen to the audiobook. But you don't need to listen to the audiobook. You can just watch one of his videos. I'll put a link to one of his videos or two of his videos down below. He's a brilliant guy. He's very nice. He's easy to understand. But he does build to some complexity there. So anyways, reassuring information that science is consistent with a theistic God.